The evening of June 23, 1950 began like any other at LaGuardia Airport in New York City. The sky was tinged with the soft glow of sunset, a deceptive serenity that belied the storm brewing hundreds of miles to the west. On the tarmac, a sleek Douglas DC-4, its four propeller engines humming softly, awaited its passengers. The plane gleamed under the fading sun, a symbol of modern travel and human ambition, carrying 55 travelers and 3 crew members on a cross-continental journey from New York to Seattle, with scheduled stops in Minneapolis and Spokane. For most aboard, it was simply another flight, routine and unremarkable. But the ordinary veneer of that evening would soon give way to an unspeakable tragedy. Captain Robert Lind, a veteran aviator with countless hours in the cockpit, reviewed his pre-flight checklist with meticulous care. His co-pilot and flight engineer moved with precise efficiency, their practiced gestures reflecting years of coordination. Outside, ground crew loaded luggage, unaware of the lives that would soon be entangled in fate's cruel design. Among the passengers, there was a mixture of business travelers carrying briefcases filled with ambition, families clutching small children, and couples seeking adventure or reunion. Each person carried with them their own hopes, worries, and mundane dreams, none anticipating that this flight would mark the end of those plans. Boarding proceeded smoothly. Flight attendants welcomed passengers with polite smiles, directing them to their assigned seats. Conversations hummed softly through the cabin. The low murmur of children, the shuffle of newspapers, the quiet click of shoes on the aisle. From the cabin windows, the city lights of New York twinkled like distant stars, a backdrop to ordinary human routines. Drinks were served, coats were hung, and as the aircraft taxied toward the runway, a sense of normalcy enveloped the scene. The DC-4 roared into the air, lifting gracefully above the skyline, seemingly impervious to the coming darkness. As the plane climbed, the crew maintained routine communication with air traffic control. Everything appeared nominal, a flight proceeding as scheduled. Yet, far to the west, a violent storm was advancing over the vast expanse of Lake Michigan, an invisible threat to the unwitting travelers. Captain Lind, focused on navigation, glanced occasionally at the weather reports, noting irregular patterns and the ominous presence of thunderstorms in the path ahead. Still, the sky over New York remained calm, and for those aboard, danger seemed remote, a distant worry rather than an immediate concern. Inside the cabin, passengers settled in, oblivious to the looming peril. A businessman reviewed papers with furrowed brow, his mind tethered to profit margins rather than meteorology. A mother soothed her child, whispering lullabies that would echo tragically in memory, to be fulfilled. Couples exchanged soft laughter, sharing dreams of future weekends and travels, unknowing participants in a narrative that would soon twist violently. The hum of engines and rhythmic vibration through the floorboards created a false sense of security, masking the storm gathering unseen hundreds of miles away. As the hours passed and the DC-4 glided steadily along its route, there was a subtle shift in atmosphere. A few clouds appeared on the horizon, the first hints of turbulence that whispered warnings of nature's power. Captain Lind remained composed, yet experienced aviators possess a keen intuition. He noted the storm's potential trajectory and began to prepare mentally for the challenge ahead. This flight, like countless others, was expected to proceed without incident, but the calm surface of the ordinary conceals the extraordinary potential for disaster. Passengers, meanwhile, remained largely unaware, engaging in quiet conversation or gazing through the windows at the fading countryside below. They were drifting toward fate with the casual confidence that comes from trusting technology and human skill. In retrospect, each detail, the laughter, the reading, the simple acts of daily life, now resonates with haunting poignancy. What began as a mundane journey filled with hopes and familiar routines was inching inexorably toward a moment when ordinary human life would collide with the merciless force of nature, leaving a legacy of mystery and sorrow that would endure for decades. By the time the DC-4 approached the western sky, the first hints of the storm over Lake Michigan were beginning to stir. The night was still, yet a distant murmur of thunder echoed faintly, unseen and unfelt by those aboard. Inside, lives continued in fragile normality, unaware that the ordinary would soon be shattered. The stage was set for a flight that would transform from a simple journey into one of the most tragic and enigmatic events in American aviation history, a flight that would vanish into the dark waters of Lake Michigan, leaving only questions, fragments, and memories of those who never reached their destination. The calm of the early evening gave way to a growing unease as the DC-4 approached the western horizon. Far over Lake Michigan, dark clouds swelled and twisted, illuminated intermittently by jagged forks of lightning that split the sky with alarming violence. The storm was not a distant spectacle. It was a living, breathing entity, vast and merciless, moving with a speed and purpose that no human could control. Onboard, passengers were beginning to notice subtle changes. The gentle hum of the engines now carried a faint vibration, the plane dipping slightly with an occasional shudder. Most dismissed it as ordinary turbulence, unaware that these minor movements were the first warnings of a catastrophe looming just beyond their perception. Captain Robert Lind, seated firmly at the controls, scanned the horizon with practiced vigilance. His eyes were trained to detect minute changes in cloud patterns and even he felt a rare twinge of apprehension. Radio reports from surrounding stations confirmed what the instruments already suggested. A severe thunderstorm was advancing across Lake Michigan, its winds fierce, its lightning frequent. The storm would not simply be a challenge to navigate. It was a deadly gauntlet, a force capable of tearing metal and scattering lives across the dark waters below. Lynn's co-pilot exchanged a brief glance, an unspoken acknowledgement of the threat, and the flight engineer monitored engine performance with heightened attention, ready to react to the first sign of mechanical strain. Within the cabin, the atmosphere shifted imperceptibly but unmistakably. A mother held her child closer, the small body trembling in her arms as if sensing something she could not yet name. Couples murmured to one another, laughter subdued and nervous. The businessman, bent over his papers, paused mid-sentence, sensing an unease he could neither articulate nor avoid. Outside, the first distant rumbles of thunder rolled like the drumbeat of some ancient warning, and faint streaks of lightning illuminated the landscape below, casting fleeting shadows across anxious faces. Every eye that strayed to the window caught glimpses of the storm's growing fury, a dark, undulating wall that promised neither mercy nor warning. The DC-4 pressed forward, a fragile vessel propelled by human engineering into the path of nature's raw power. Captain Lind adjusted the flight path slightly, attempting to navigate around the worst of the storm cells, but Lake Michigan's breadth offered little refuge. Gusts buffeted the wings, causing small but unnerving dips and rolls. Inside, tension quietly escalated. Passengers gripped armrests, whispered reassurances to one another, and stared into the dim lighting of the cabin with a mounting sense of vulnerability. No one could yet predict how quickly the ordinary journey would dissolve into tragedy, how swiftly the routine flight would transform into a desperate struggle against forces far beyond human control. The storm's approach brought with it eerie phenomena. Lightning strikes crackled across the horizon, bright enough to illuminate the entire cabin for a heartbeat, revealing startled expressions frozen mid-reaction. Rain began to fall in sheets, invisible at first, then hammering the fuselage with a relentless rhythm. The plane's metal skin rattled, and the engines responded with subtle but urgent changes in pitch. Lynn's voice over the intercom, calm yet precise, reassured passengers, masking the growing challenge with professional composure. Yet, the crew knew the storm's full capacity had not yet revealed itself. What appeared manageable in early reports was only the surface of an overwhelming force gathering momentum. Air traffic control tracked the DC-4's progress with increasing concern. The storm, already producing wind shear and turbulence, threatened other flights, and controllers monitored every signal with tense vigilance. Lind requested updated weather readings and adjusted altitudes, seeking safer corridors through the approaching tempest. Every decision carried immense weight. A single miscalculation could cascade into disaster. The tension was invisible but palpable, weaving through every cabin aisle, into every passenger's heartbeat, and into the rhythm of engines straining against rising winds. By the time the DC-4 reached the edge of Lake Michigan, the storm had transformed into a dark leviathan, massive and unyielding. Thunder rolled like cannon fire across the sky, and sheets of rain streaked down like liquid steel. Lightning illuminated the restless waters below, revealing waves that mirrored the chaos in the air above. Within the cabin, whispered fears escalated into nervous silence. Passengers' faces, once filled with the ease of routine travel, now reflected apprehension, uncertainty, and a dawning awareness of vulnerability. The plane pressed onward, unaware that this flight, ordinary just hours earlier, was about to enter a sequence of events that would defy explanation, shatter lives, and leave an enduring mystery. The storm was a predator, relentless and implacable, and the DC-4, along with its 58 souls, was threading its path into the heart of an unfolding tragedy. The passengers, trusting in metal, skill, and routine, had no inkling that their journey would soon vanish into the darkness, leaving only fragments, questions, and the haunting memory of a menacing horizon that marked the beginning of their final ordeal. The storm over Lake Michigan had intensified by late evening, transforming the night sky into a violent canvas of light and sound. Jagged bolts of lightning split the darkness, followed by the deep, rolling booms of thunder that seemed to shake the very air. Inside the DC-4, passengers clutched armrests and each other, the soft hum of engines now punctuated by sudden shudders as the aircraft struggled against gusts of wind that twisted and buffeted its frame. Captain Robert Lynn's hands gripped the yoke with practiced firmness, his knuckles white under the dim cockpit lights. Every instrument was scrutinized, every gauge monitored. Even the smallest anomaly could signal catastrophe. The crew's calm professionalism contrasted sharply with the storm's growing menace. Yet behind each measured action lay a keen awareness of the precariousness of their situation. At precisely 23:37, the moment that would mark the beginning of an enduring mystery arrived. Captain Lind keyed the radio, his voice steady yet tinged with urgency. "This is Flight 250, over Lake Michigan, altitude 3,500 feet. Requesting descent to 2,500 due to severe weather." The transmission, crisp and clear, carried across the airwaves to the listening towers on shore. Air traffic controllers acknowledged the request, but another aircraft was nearby, forcing the DC-4 to maintain altitude. The denial was routine in protocol, yet it cast a shadow of tension over the cockpit, an invisible boundary between order and chaos. Lynn's acknowledgement was calm, professional, but in that split second, a storm of possibilities swirled: turbulence, structural stress, and the unpredictable fury of nature itself. Inside the cabin, passengers sensed the storm's full power. Lightning flashed intermittently through the small, oval windows, illuminating wide eyes and tense expressions. A child whimpered softly, sensing the adult's unease. Couples exchanged terse words, clinging to fragments of reassurance as the aircraft pitched sharply, then leveled. The engines responded to the turbulent currents, a low roar that reverberated through the cabin floor. Every shudder, every tilt of the plane felt amplified in the intimate confines of the fuselage, each moment stretching seconds into eternities for those aboard. The ordinary journey had dissolved into a fragile dance of survival against forces beyond comprehension, yet no one could foresee the finality that loomed just ahead. Moments after the last transmission, radar operators watched the DC-4's signal flicker. The plane had entered a zone of extreme turbulence, and the instruments struggled to maintain a steady reading. Then, abruptly, the aircraft disappeared from the radar screens. No distress call, no mayday. Only a sudden silence that seemed to swallow the voices of both crew and passengers. The absence of signal, instantaneous and complete, struck with horrifying clarity. Something catastrophic had occurred. Controllers attempted repeated calls, their voices crisp yet increasingly anxious over the airwaves. Each unanswered query deepened the sense of dread, amplifying the uncertainty that would soon evolve into tragedy. Back in the cockpit, if the crew had moments to react, those moments were fleeting. Lightning struck with indiscriminate violence, illuminating the interior with a stark, unearthly glow. The plane pitched violently, wings tilting sharply, instruments vibrating in alarm. Captain Lind and his crew worked with rapid precision, but the forces they faced were beyond human control. The storm's fury pressed from all sides, a relentless assault that transformed the once familiar cabin into a crucible of tension. Every second was laden with peril, every decision weighted by the knowledge that survival hung in an almost invisible balance. For the passengers, the experience was terror incarnate. For the crew, it was a battle of skill and instinct against nature's raw power. Outside, Lake Michigan churned under the storm, like waves reflecting the electrical chaos above. Thunder rolled across the waters, masking the invisible impact of the aircraft as it struggled through the tempest. The darkness was absolute, punctuated only by flashes of light that revealed fleeting glimpses of a fragile vessel braving an impossible trial. In those final moments, human lives were compressed into intense experiences of fear, hope, and desperate endurance. No one could predict whether the DC-4 would emerge from the storm intact or succumb to the forces it had dared to challenge. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the plane vanished. The night reclaimed its silence, broken only by the distant echo of thunder. On shore, radar screens remained blank, radios crackled unanswered, and families, still unaware of the scale of the disaster, continued their ordinary evenings, oblivious to the tragedy unfolding miles above the churning waters. The last contact of Flight 250 marked not only the disappearance of a machine, but the suspension of human expectation, the sudden collapse of routine into a void of uncertainty. In that void, the seeds of mystery, sorrow, and enduring fascination were sown, establishing a haunting narrative that would resonate for decades to come, long after the voices on the radio had fallen silent. As dawn broke over the restless waters of Lake Michigan, the full scale of the tragedy began to emerge. The DC-4, which had vanished into the night without a distress call, had left behind only unanswered questions and a growing sense of dread. U.S. Navy vessels and Coast Guard cutters were dispatched immediately, slicing through the churning waves in a desperate search for signs of life. Aircraft joined the effort, their crews scanning the dark surface of the lake from above, binoculars pressed to eyes, hearts heavy with anticipation and fear. The early morning sky was gray and oppressive, echoing the uncertainty that gripped everyone involved. Families waiting anxiously on shore, rescue teams braving turbulent waters, and the broader public drawn into a narrative of tragedy that defied comprehension. The initial sweep revealed fragments. Small pieces of debris bobbed in the waves, the first physical evidence that the plane had met a violent fate. A patch of oil slicked the water like spilled ink, an ominous marker of mechanical catastrophe beneath the surface. The searchers collected bits of fabric, twisted metal, and personal items, pockets, handbags, even a child's toy drifting alone amid the expanse of water. Each discovery was a jarring confirmation that the passengers' lives had been violently interrupted, yet the scale of the loss remained difficult to comprehend. No aircraft fuselage, no engines, no intact structure, only scattered fragments floating in a vast, indifferent lake. The enormity of the task ahead became painfully clear. Lake Michigan was both grave and enigma, hiding the majority of the aircraft and its passengers beneath its cold, dark depths. For the rescue crews, the operation was a battle against not just time, but nature itself. Waves tossed small boats, spray stinging the faces of sailors, while winds whipped across the water, hampering aerial reconnaissance. Visibility was limited, and the storm's remnants still lingered in the form of turbulent air currents and rolling clouds. Every attempt to locate the main wreckage was met with frustration, each scan of the lake's surface yielding little more than fleeting evidence of the calamity. Search teams communicated urgently over radios, coordinating sectors and patterns, aware that every moment wasted could reduce the chance of finding survivors. The tension was palpable. The hunt was both methodical and desperate, a race against time and against the sheer unpredictability of the natural world. Meanwhile, onshore, families gathered in anxious clusters at ports and small towns along the lake's edge. They had spent the night clinging to hope, listening to the radio for any hint of news. Now, faced with the stark reality of floating debris, the hope wavered, replaced by growing fear and grief. Each item recovered, a torn coat, a fragment of luggage, a personal belonging, carried with it the weight of lives abruptly interrupted. The human element of the disaster was unavoidable. The cold technical details of aviation merged with visceral emotional pain, creating a tableau of sorrow that stretched from the waters of the lake to the hearts of those awaiting answers. As the day progressed, reports of the scattered findings poured in. The Coast Guard documented every item, every fragment, careful to preserve evidence while acknowledging the grim significance of their work. Each new discovery sparked waves of both sorrow and speculation. What had caused the plane to break apart so completely? Was it the storm's relentless assault, an internal mechanical failure, or some unforeseen combination of forces? The lack of survivors intensified the horror, transforming the search into a haunting quest for closure that seemed increasingly unattainable. Despite the tireless efforts, the largest and most critical sections of the aircraft, the fuselage, engines, and majority of the passengers, remained elusive. The lake held them in silent concealment, a vast, merciless tomb that refused to yield its secrets. The juxtaposition of minor floating debris with the absence of the main wreckage created a surreal and terrifying reality. The passengers were gone. The plane was gone. And yet fragments of their lives floated on the surface, whispering of the human cost and the mystery that had just begun. As night approached once again, search efforts continued under fading light, the waves now darkened by shadows and the encroaching gloom. Rescue teams, exhausted yet relentless, pressed onward, guided by the faint hope of locating more evidence or, impossibly, survivors. But with each passing hour, the tragedy solidified, the enormity of the loss settling over the lake like a shroud. The hunt had begun with urgency and determination, yet it became increasingly clear that Lake Michigan was both grave and enigma, guarding its secrets with implacable resolve. The search had turned from recovery to haunting vigil, a desperate attempt to piece together a story fractured into fragments of metal, cloth, and human memory, leaving behind a profound sense of sorrow and an enduring mystery that would grip the nation for decades to come. The surface of Lake Michigan, once calm and deceptive, had become a mosaic of fragments, each piece telling a silent story of catastrophe. The initial discovery of floating debris had given search teams their first tangible evidence, but as the hours turned into days, the grim reality became increasingly impossible to ignore. Seat cushions, torn clothing, and personal belongings bobbed in the restless water, each fragment a haunting reminder of lives abruptly shattered. Small portions of the aircraft's fuselage appeared sporadically, twisted and waterlogged, incapable of revealing the full scale of the destruction. Investigators and rescuers alike felt the weight of despair with every new piece recovered. The lake's surface a tableau of scattered grief, a puzzle with missing pieces that might never be found. Among the floating items, the human toll was immediately apparent. Personal effects, wallets, letters, a child's toy, drifted in eerie isolation, bearing witness to the passenger's vanished presence. Some items were strangely intact, as if frozen in the moment the plane had succumbed to the storm, while others were shredded, torn apart by the force of impact or the relentless waters below. Rescue teams moved with grim precision, collecting these remnants while the families on shore watched helplessly, each discovery amplifying the ache of uncertainty. There were no cries, no voices, only silent testimony to the abrupt cessation of ordinary lives. The lake had become both grave and messenger, delivering fragments of a tragedy that defied comprehension. The absence of the main wreckage added layers of mystery and horror. Engines, wings, the fuselage, objects that should have been central to understanding the disaster, remained elusive, submerged beneath dark, unknowable depths. The impossibility of their retrieval amplified the sense of helplessness and bewilderment. Speculation ran rampant among investigators and the public alike. Some posited that the plane had broken apart midair, fragments scattered by sheer velocity and the storm's ferocity. Others suggested a sudden structural failure, the wings or tail unable to withstand the violent gusts, sending the aircraft into a catastrophic descent. Each theory offered a partial explanation, none capable of fully accounting for the eerie precision with which the pieces were scattered across the lake. Rescue crews documented each find meticulously, aware that even the smallest fragment could hold clues to the disaster. Fabric patterns, twisted metal angles, and the condition of recovered objects were analyzed in painstaking detail. Yet the psychological toll on those performing the recovery was immense. Every item collected reinforced the human magnitude of the tragedy, a tangible representation of absence, a reminder that 58 lives had been suddenly extinguished with no witness, no final words, and no clear cause. The lake seemed indifferent to the suffering it concealed, each ripple across its surface mocking the futility of human comprehension. The haunting nature of the discoveries extended beyond physical objects. The randomness of what was recovered and what remained hidden created a chilling sense of incompleteness. A wallet might drift miles from the last known location, while a child's toy floated nearby, separated from its owner by the invisible forces of water and wind. Investigators struggled to reconcile the floating remnants with the reality that the vast majority of the aircraft, along with most of the passengers, remained lost beneath the murky depths. This absence rendered every recovery simultaneously revealing and terrifying, a stark reminder of the limits of human control against nature's overwhelming power. Public reaction to these findings was immediate and intense. Media reports described the floating debris in vivid, unsettling detail, conveying the horror and mystery to readers hundreds of miles from the lake. Families clung to any scrap of information, hoping for recognition, dreading confirmation, and imagining the final moments of loved ones aboard the doomed flight. Rumors and theories proliferated, from mid-air explosions to lightning strikes, from mechanical failure to impossible turbulence. The narrative became a mix of factual recovery and collective imagination, fueled by the partial evidence the lake allowed to surface. Despite exhaustive search efforts, the central enigma persisted. The main fuselage, the engines, and the majority of the passengers remained hidden, swallowed by the cold, implacable depths. Every fragment collected, every personal item recovered, emphasized not only the biographical detail of lives lost, but also the incompleteness of human understanding. The lake had delivered pieces of the puzzle, each fragment a silent witness, yet withheld the full story. In that delicate balance between revelation and concealment, the tragedy assumed a haunting quality, a combination of sorrow, awe, and enduring mystery that would grip the nation, leaving an indelible mark on both those who searched the waters and those who waited for answers that would never fully arrive. The haunting discoveries transformed the catastrophe into an enduring enigma. Each fragment, each floating remnant carried the weight of absence and sorrow, weaving together a narrative that was incomplete yet profoundly affecting. The DC-4's passengers had vanished, leaving behind only scattered evidence of lives interrupted. A broken puzzle reflecting the immense power of nature, the fragility of human endeavor, and the unfathomable mystery of the storm that had claimed them. The lake, indifferent yet revealing, became both stage and witness, preserving a tragedy in fragments that would haunt imagination and memory for generations. In the wake of the DC-4's disappearance, investigators, experts, and the public were left grappling with a storm of questions that had no clear answers. The fragments recovered from Lake Michigan offered tantalizing hints, yet the absence of the main wreckage and the silence of 58 lives turned the disaster into a labyrinth of speculation. Aviation specialists pored over the details, the scattered seat cushions, the twisted pieces of fuselage, the engines that remained submerged and unreachable. Each piece suggested violence, abrupt force, and fragmentation, but none could definitively explain how a routine flight had ended in such complete catastrophe. Theories emerged rapidly, debated fiercely, and each carried its own chilling implications. One of the most prominent explanations focused on a possible mid-air explosion. Lightning had been recorded striking in the vicinity of the aircraft, and investigators considered the potential for electrical discharge to ignite fuel. In theory, a bolt of lightning could have struck the fuel tanks or ignited a mechanical fault, causing the plane to rupture in the air. The violent scattering of debris across the lake lent some credence to this possibility. Yet, there was no definitive evidence. No signs of burn marks on the recovered fragments, no charred sections of fuselage, only speculation and a haunting absence of proof. The possibility of an airborne explosion left families and investigators alike haunted by the notion of lives ending in an instant, without warning, without even a chance to call for help. Another hypothesis considered the structural integrity of the aircraft under extreme weather conditions. The DC-4, though a reliable plane, was not invincible. Thunderstorms over Lake Michigan were notorious for sudden gusts, wind shear, and violent turbulence. Witnesses reported that the storm had been unusually fierce, with gusts strong enough to bend trees along the shoreline. Experts theorized that the wings or tail could have failed under the stress, causing the aircraft to break apart in midair. The fragments recovered, small and irregular, seemed consistent with catastrophic structural failure, as if the plane had been pulled violently into pieces by forces beyond human control. The thought of passengers and crew caught in such a sudden collapse added a layer of chilling inevitability to the tragedy. Mechanical failure was also considered. Investigators examined the plane's maintenance records, searching for anomalies that could have contributed to disaster. While the DC-4 had a solid safety record, even minor faults could become catastrophic under extreme conditions. Perhaps an engine malfunction combined with violent turbulence had caused a loss of control, sending the aircraft into a fatal descent. Yet, without the main fuselage or black box, such theories remained conjecture, a puzzle incomplete and frustratingly enigmatic. The impossibility of certainty intensified the collective anxiety, turning every speculation into a ghostly narrative of what might have been. Amid technical considerations, human factors were not ignored. Captain Lind was an experienced pilot, yet even skill and training have limits when confronted with nature's unrelenting power. Crew responses, split-second decisions, and attempts to navigate around the storm became part of the tapestry of speculation. Some theories suggested that rapid changes in altitude or course, combined with sudden gusts, created conditions no human could correct in time. The tension between human capability and environmental force became a central theme in discussions, reinforcing the tragic inevitability of the event. Public imagination amplified the mystery, feeding a growing narrative of fear and fascination. Newspapers speculated wildly. Some hinted at sabotage, others suggested supernatural explanations, while radio programs recounted the storm's fury with dramatic embellishments. Families clung to fragments of information, and at each new report a mixture of hope and dread. The combination of factual evidence and conjecture created a narrative that was at once compelling and horrifying, ensuring that the event would linger in collective memory long after the last debris had been collected. Modern investigators would later employ sonar scans and underwater searches, but even with advanced technology, the plane's remains resisted discovery. The lack of closure ensured that speculation remained central to the story. Each recovered fragment, while providing a small glimpse into the disaster, underscored the enormity of the unknown. Experts and laypeople alike wrestled with the unanswerable question: what truly happened in those final moments over Lake Michigan? In the end, the theories, while compelling, could not resolve the haunting void left by the DC-4's disappearance. Mid-air explosion, structural failure, mechanical malfunction, human error, all were plausible, yet none were proven. The ambiguity intensified the tragedy, turning a single catastrophic event into a persistent mystery. The plane, the passengers, and the crew remained suspended in memory and speculation, their fate locked beneath the dark waters. Each theory, each possibility, carried with it not only technical intrigue, but also profound sorrow, cementing the disaster as both an enduring enigma and a profoundly human tragedy that continues to haunt imagination and history. Decades have passed since the DC-4 vanished into the storm over Lake Michigan, yet its legacy continues to ripple through history, memory, and imagination. The 58 lives lost that night, passengers and crew alike, left behind families forever altered, communities marked by grief, and a nation confronted with the fragility of human endeavor. The event was the deadliest commercial aviation disaster in American history at the time, and its haunting absence of closure cemented its place as both tragedy and enigma. Families never received the full measure of explanation, only fragments, clothing, personal effects, scattered debris, that became grim tokens of lives interrupted in midair, moments frozen forever in uncertainty and sorrow. Memorials and remembrance efforts have honored those lost, yet the absence of the main wreckage created a unique, almost spectral legacy. Unlike other tragedies where recovery allows closure, the DC-4 remains hidden beneath the lake's icy depths, leaving an indelible void in both factual record and emotional resolution. Families endured decades of unanswered questions, revisiting memories, imagining final moments, and struggling with the inability to fully comprehend what had transpired. The lake became a silent tomb, indifferent yet deeply poignant, holding secrets of human lives abruptly extinguished and suspended in the cold darkness far from any comforting light. The mystery itself became part of the cultural narrative, a cautionary tale and a subject of enduring fascination. Aviation experts, historians, and amateur sleuths have returned to the case repeatedly, employing ever more sophisticated technology, from sonar mapping to underwater probes, in hopes of discovering the elusive fuselage, engines, or other critical wreckage. Each expedition has revealed small fragments, tantalizing glimpses, or no evidence at all, reinforcing both the challenge of the search and the inescapable enormity of what remains hidden. The very absence of discovery contributes to the plane's haunting reputation, a symbol of how nature can obliterate certainty and leave humanity grasping at the edges of comprehension. Beyond the technical and investigative realm, the human story persists. Survivors' families, descendants, and communities continue to commemorate the lives lost, telling stories of ordinary people, mothers and fathers, businessmen, children, whose routines and hopes were violently interrupted. The fragments that floated to the surface became both evidence and symbols. A torn wallet, a child's toy, a piece of fabric. They served as tangible reminders that ordinary existence can be undone in an instant, that life's fragility exists in the thin margin between normalcy and catastrophe. In recounting these details, the tragedy becomes more than statistics. It becomes vivid, intimate, and profoundly moving. The case also influenced aviation safety practices, highlighting the unpredictable hazards of severe weather and the limitations of mid-century technology. Lessons learned, whether in storm tracking, radio communication protocols, or aircraft design, were born from a loss so deep that it reverberated through industry and regulation. Yet, despite improvements, the story remains unique, a disaster where mystery and loss are inseparable, where what could have been a simple investigative conclusion is instead an enduring human riddle. The plane's disappearance into Lake Michigan transformed it from a simple accident into a narrative about uncertainty, nature's power, and the limits of human foresight. Public fascination has not waned. Books, documentaries, and historical retrospectives explore the events in meticulous detail, reconstructing timelines, theorizing outcomes, and highlighting the human element of courage, routine, and vulnerability. The combination of unanswered questions and tangible fragments ensures that each retelling carries both suspense and sorrow. Audiences are drawn not only to the technical mysteries, but also to the emotional resonance, lives lived, abruptly ended, and the unrelenting silence that followed. Each retelling reinforces the duality of the event, tragic loss intertwined with an enduring enigma that cannot be fully solved. Ultimately, the DC-4 over Lake Michigan represents more than a historical aviation disaster. It is a testament to impermanence, to the unpredictability of life, and to the human desire for understanding in the face of inexplicable tragedy. The storm claimed not just a plane, but a narrative of ordinary existence, scattering lives like fragments across an indifferent expanse. The mystery endures, the sorrow persists, and the memory of those lost remains vivid, haunting, and inescapable. Their legacy is a mixture of grief, fascination, and the profound acknowledgement that some questions are destined to remain unanswered, leaving humanity to wrestle with both loss and wonder across generations. The lake keeps its secret still, and in that silence, the story of Flight 250 continues to resonate, a tragedy unmeasured, unresolved, and unforgettable.